Linkage Institutions, Unit 3, Video 7. All right, all about primaries. All right, so this is the types of election section of the notes. We have two main types. We have general elections and we have primaries. General elections, very simple. That's where if you win, you take office, whether that is president, whether that's for the Congress, House, or Senate, doesn't matter. If you win a general election, you get to win that office. The main one that we're going to talk about in this video is primaries. All right, so primaries is where parties are able to choose their candidates for the general election. So on the left, you can see those are the people from the Democratic primary in 2008. On the right, those are the men and women from the Republican primary in 2012. So you probably recognize some of those people. You got Obama obviously there, and Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden's all the way to the left on the Democratic side. Either way, the point is it was Democrats versus other Democrats and Republicans against other Republicans. Despite those smiling faces, they were running against each other at that moment. So it was Democrats trying to become their party's nominee for president. All right, there are primaries in all 50 states, as you can see in that map, and they're held in different dates. So there's not one date where everybody goes and votes in primaries. So throughout the country, spread out over a period of about 6 months from January to June, every state will have their primary. Whoever wins each state gets delegates who commit to vote for that candidate at the national convention. So if you win the state of Texas or the state of Florida or whatever state, then you get to pick the delegates that will go to the national convention and actually officially make you the party's nominee. So the important thing to know is, well, what are delegates? Basically, that picture at the bottom left, those are delegates. They are people. They officially vote for the candidate at the national convention. So that's a picture of the Republican National Convention in 2012. You can see a few of them holding Mitt Romney signs, all clapping. So happy to see their savior, Mitt Romney, and so they are there. You can see the states. So there are delegates from Michigan, from Ohio, from Utah, from Illinois, Wisconsin. What else? Idaho, I see Maine. Trying to see what that one, South Carolina over there in the back, kind of small font. But the point is, when a candidate wins the primary in that state, they get to be the ones who choose the group of people from that state who will go to the national convention and will actually officially cast the votes that make that person become their party's candidate. So those people around the Michigan side, they are citizens of Michigan who supported Mitt Romney, and so when he won the state of Michigan, he then chose those people to be the delegates at the National Convention, and their job is to show up at the National Convention in August and to vote for Mitt Romney to be the candidate. Okay, so again, you can see on the right-hand side that there is a total number of delegates needed to win the party's nomination. The Republicans, that number happened to be 1144. Democrats happen to be 2024. Totally irrelevant, not important at all. The idea, though, is that you win a few delegates in every state, and it keeps adding up. And eventually the person who wins is the person who won that magic number of delegates. All right, a couple different types of primaries. I want you to focus on open and close, by far the more important ones. Open primaries, you can see those states are dark blue. If you have an open primary, then anybody can vote in them. As long as you are a registered voter, you can show up, and on election day, you choose which party's primary you want to vote in. So you can choose whether to vote in the Republican or the Democratic Party's primary, but again, you have to choose. You cannot do both. So you do have to make that decision. Closed primary, you have to be registered to that party. So you have to be a registered Republican to vote in the Republican primary, or a registered Democrat to vote in the Democratic Party's primary. And you can see the states that have closed primaries, Florida being among those. All right, another type of primary is a caucus. The purpose of a caucus and a primary is the exact same. They are both have the purpose of choosing a party's candidate. The way that they are done is different. Whereas in a primary, you just simply go and vote like any other election. You go, you fill out the ballot, and you leave, go about the rest of your day. Caucuses, they are a meeting of party members. So these are actual photographs from 2012 Iowa caucus. And the idea is pretty simple. They go, they sit there for a few hours, they hear speeches on behalf of all the candidates. This happens all over the state. of Iowa and the other couple of states that have caucuses too. They hear speeches on behalf of the candidate. These are usually in like high school gyms or auditoriums all over the state of Iowa. And after, a little bit of time with that, they start voting. But instead of going to, an electronic ballot or anything like that, computer-generated voting, they vote by hand. They literally write down the names of the candidates that they want. They pass in the papers, somebody counts them, and they do this continuously because you start off with about 8 candidates. Whoever comes in last place, that person is disqualified. So the people who voted for them, they have to vote for somebody new now. And they keep doing this over and over again until you finally have one person wins. The main point here is that only people that are really political and really committed are actually going to do this. So the caucus voters tend to be much more ideological than your typical voters. So it's not really representative of the public as a whole. All right, now the way that states can divide up their delegates, 2 different ways. They can do it on a winner-take-all basis. So some states have a winner-take-all primary, other states have what's known as a proportional primary. Winner-take-all is very, very simple. All you have to do is win the most votes. So if you win a plurality of votes, more than anybody else, then you get all of that state's delegates. So if you look on the right, Florida, in 2012, we are a winner-take-all state. So Mitt Romney won the primary in the state of Florida with 46% of the vote. He did not even get half of the vote, a majority. And yet, he was able to win all 50 of our delegates because of that, because we were winner-take-all. This is going to cause the race to be over a lot sooner, because if you win a few states, winner-take-all, even by close results, you are able to gain a very large lead very, very quickly. On the other hand, Democrats tend to use proportional representation primaries. And as you can see in that top right-hand picture or graph, it has the results of the Iowa caucus in 2008. And you can see that Obama won with 38%, John Edwards had 30%, and Hillary Clinton had 29%. They then each win delegates in proportion to the percent of the vote that they won. So as a result of that, even though Obama won 38%, he did not get all of their delegates. Had they done this as the winner-take-all Republicans do, they would have, or Obama would have had 45 delegates, it looks like. Everybody else would have had 0. But because it was proportional, it's almost a 3-way tie. They're basically all have about the same, which is definitely going to impact this race and cause it to last much longer as they try to work their way up to the magic number that they need to win. All right, some states engage in something called front-loading. Florida is a prime example of front-loading. It's when states choose earlier dates to have their primaries. The reason that the state of Florida does that, so we're basically cutting in line. So that's what front-loading is. We're supposed to have our primary in May, but we jump up to the front of the line. We have ours in late January now. We're like the 4th or 5th state that has their primary the last 2 election cycles, and the reason for that is because earlier states have more influence. They receive more attention from the media, more attention from the candidates, and the state desires that, so we jump ahead and engage in front-loading. So this is something that's happening more and more often these days. All right, there is a day known as Super Tuesday. It is oftentimes the most important day of the primary season. It is the day with the most primaries. You can see in 2008, prior to Super Tuesday, which usually takes place at the end of February, beginning of March, there were only 238 delegates available before that point. On Super Tuesday, there were 1,000 delegates up for grabs because anywhere between 15 to 25 states all have their primaries on the same exact day. So it is a big day in the primary season. All right, Democrats have something called super delegates. And I know this is one of the more annoying parts of this section. It's one of the tougher things to truly understand. All right, so they have super delegates. Super delegates are people, okay? They're going to be delegates at the National Convention, just like all of the other delegates. Now, whereas regular delegates, the way that candidates get their votes is that they win states. And if they win a state, they then get to choose the delegates from that state to go vote for them at the National Convention. Superdelegates don't work that way. Superdelegates are party leaders. They are elected officials, so it can be like former President Bill Clinton. Obama will become a superdelegate next time because he will be former president. Senators, representatives, governors, basically name like famous names, top Democrats throughout the country. They get to be delegates at the National Convention. So they get invited, they get to show up there, and they too get to cast a vote of who they think should be president. The big thing is that you can't win their vote. There's no election. They are free to vote for whoever they want. And as a result, what is happening, the result of this is what I should say, it gives the Democratic Party more control and more power over who their candidate is. Like, you see the tone of these political cartoons is obviously kind of negative towards the idea of superdelegates. And the reason for that is because now superdelegates, party leaders, potentially, I'm going to go back a couple slides to show you, but if you notice here, Clinton and Obama, in red and blue, that's how many delegates they had from the primaries and caucuses. They needed to get to that finish line, 21-17. Neither one of them were able to do that, okay? Neither Clinton nor Obama on their own. So what that means is that superdelegates were going to be the difference between Clinton winning or Obama winning. If the superdelegates had all voted for Hillary, she would have been the Democratic Party's nominee. However, they didn't do that. And one likely reason why the Democratic superdelegates chose to vote for Obama, even though a lot of them liked Hillary originally, is because it would have totally undermined the vote of the people. Like, you see that bottom left political cartoon where that voter is saying my vote counts, right? And then the other one saying maybe not because of superdelegates. They didn't want that to happen. You can see that top right-hand cartoon for superdelegates. The superdelegate is basically scaring and ruining democracy. So that's not what they really want. But the point is, it does give more power back to the party in choosing their candidate. National Convention is where you officially nominate the presidential candidate, and that's your Republican on the right. Nope, on the left is the Republican one, actually, and the Democrats are on the right. All right, the rise of the primary system has made the nomination process more democratic because it gives people more control over picking their party's candidates. The idea here is that in the past, the political parties themselves would choose who their own candidates were. So it would be party leaders would pick their candidates, and then the only time people could vote was in the general election. Today, not only can you vote in the general election, but you can also vote in your party's nominating process, which is the primaries. Criticism of the primary system is that, for one, there's too much importance placed in early states. Iowa is your first caucus. New Hampshire is your first primary. They are both very little states. They're both very, let's say, unrepresentative of the country as a whole. Iowa is like 97% white, so it doesn't really represent the country, and yet they're given a lot of importance when it comes to the primaries and picking the candidates that will become president one day. Caucus voters, we already mentioned this earlier in the video, but they are more ideological, and therefore they are not representative of the average American. So they tend to be very liberal or very conservative. Most people are moderate, somewhere in the middle. Candidates appeal to more ideological voters in primaries, and then they come back to the center in the general election. So this is saying the people who vote in primaries, they tend to be, if you look at the bottom left, that table, you can see people who are consistently conservative or consistently liberal, they vote more than anybody else in primaries. Your moderates, they don't tend to vote very much in primaries. They do vote, however, in the general election. So what happens is, during the primaries, a candidate is trying to appeal to the ideological branches of their party. So Mitt Romney, he had to become like he was very conservative back in 2012 in the primaries. Obama in 2008 had to be very liberal to win his party's primary. But now when they win their primary and they're running against each other, then they both wanted to seem like they were moderate. So the idea is that they go to the far right or the farther left of their party in the primaries, and then they come back and they fight over the center. Because moderates, independents, That's how you win or lose elections, is based on those voters.